Where's the click on?
There isn't.
What?
There isn't.
Really?
So you'll have to just click the keyboard.
We're going to click this one. Select that in the back. Georgina, do you want to come down and say a few words? Try to get her to speak at another event, but Julie Gardner dropped out, so I'm going to try and get to talk about digital transformation on Thursday. I'm not going to turn up Thursday, so she'll have to go on. Or Tom. Tom can improve his badge status. Right, 10:30, make a start.
Yeah, Tom, would you be able to just close the door?
And if the name's not down on the list, can you just kind of hold them off? It is a bouncy bill, isn't it? He's doing it as well. Right, well, thank you very much for taking the time out, guys, to attend this session. Hopefully we'll make it as enjoyable as possible. I'll introduce myself, Jonathan Wright from CA. I'm part of the R&D team back in Oxford in the UK. And today I will be co-presented with Tom Finch, who is a senior consultant, who's going to be covering off some more of the hardcore mainframe stuff that I can't cover off. So thankfully, I say thankfully, the first half an hour is going to be me giving some kind of visionary, exciting stuff around mainframe and distributed architectures, which is actually going to be part of my conversation on my presentation on Wednesday. You may be asking what the relevance is. Hopefully it'll all come together at the end, and I'll give you some links as well to various different resources as we go through. So, I don't think we need the disclaimer one. This isn't the future forward-looking one.
No, this is just the usual levers.
Yeah, well, the normally one that says anything that's in this deck may change at any time, and we pull out any, we have the right to change it, which is probably quite good actually, because some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today is stuff that's on our roadmap going forward, especially for the next year. And I'd like to introduce some of those technologies as well today, based on the fact that they'll probably be very relevant for what you guys, the challenges you've got in your kind of landscape. So I'm not going to bother too many people throughout this presentation, but just to get a kind of an understanding of where everyone's come from. Are you guys kind of dealing with is it the mainframe side of things, or is it the distributed systems? Mainframe one hand, anyone? Mainframe lovers? Oh, beautiful. I'm now calling them micro mainframe, which is like stick a microservice on the front, it'll be fine. It probably won't be actually. And then everyone else is more kind of distributed systems kind of view of the world. Is that correct? Oh, that's really good. So hopefully some of this stuff will hit home. So I guess if I'd have been at CA World 2015, there would have been a huge hype around digital. And I'm hoping that's kind of died off now. So every time you see digital, just remove it from the word. So when I say talking about ecology, don't worry about the digital ecology. It's kind of, what I'm looking at talking about. I should start from the bottom up for a bit of more fun. So data ecology is around understanding your landscape. So if you've got like a few people put their hands up around mainframe and distributed systems, part of this ecology is actually understanding that whole landscape. So some of it's probing and sensing, so it's literally understanding where data is, where the data transforms happen in the ETLs and EDIs. It also understands, where the data's flowing. And to me, this is kind of opening Pandora's box. This is, those systems existed, but the architecture's gone out of date, the people have left. They've left you in these situations where you're not completely sure how the data's flowing through your system, where it's stored, where the duplicates are. And really, to me, digital was all about digitalization. It's about understanding your landscape, so that way you could do smart things with it. So you could start pivoting, you could start applying data science, you could do all these things which you can't do because you feel like you're restricted in the mainframe land. equally, that's where kind of my group of guys at the back doing stuff on their laptops, I guess, is where I've got data archaeologists. Now, Hugh Price, who will be joining us once he gets off the phone with the customer, you know, part of what we've been doing with customers is going up and digging up some of that legacy and some of that mainframe and bringing it in, making it go from the dark into the light, so you can really understand where the flows are going, where to get data from, what to do with it, how you can start generating test data for testing purposes by digging up, and also knowing when to stop digging, because otherwise this could be a huge waste of money. And that's kind of where the next topic kind of comes in, around digital assurance. So this is, you know, everyone's got complex ecosystems. You know, we're all in that struggling to kind of understand what the risk profile is. When we've done enough, you know, you think about just some of the recent challenges around security, which come into play, and compliance. You know, at what point can you say we're in a good position? And this is where I started kind of sitting this digital assurance, which is kind of where quality assurance kind of fell short, because everyone just believed quality assurance was testing. And what happened is there was no way of understanding what those major changes which you're trying to do through your organizations, those charters or those themes that you're trying to push through. That could be something like an open banking platform, or that could be something like GDPR regulatory and compliance. And you know, how do you understand all your systems landscape and whether or not they're ready? And then equally what that risk profile is. And then I'm hoping that quite a few of you today are probably sat there thinking, well, you know, I really wouldn't mind getting into this kind of continuous testing, DevOps kind of landscape, but still kind of thinking, well, I've just got too much complex old systems. There's no way that I'm going to be able to put them through a release pipe. So, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about continuous testing. And then, you know, as I mentioned, you know, the legacy is your legacy is kind of a piece of a blog that I just published on Friday. If anyone's taking notes and want to actually access that now, there's obviously I've not typed the link in, but servicevirtualization.com is a microsite of CAs, and you'll find this right at the top of the listings on servicevirtualization.com. And it was a bit of a joke. You know, part of it was people kind of saying that they're held back by legacy, and actually, to me, legacy is your future. You know, everything you do at some point will turn into legacy. As soon as something that wasn't once known is unknown, then it becomes this kind of, oh no, not quite sure what this system does, or what this transform does, or what this API does, because you know it's, and you know, you could even release stuff into the pipe now and it can become legacy instantaneously. So I don't think legacy has a time limit on it, or an expiry. I think actually legacy is kind of how you move your organization forwards, and what is going to be the differentiator between you and potential disruptors. You know, to me, every time I find data, I feel like this is, you know, this is the time where you should be utilizing that data to make smarter decisions about what you're doing. But if this data is sat away in some old system, it's going to be really hard to find that data and do anything useful with it. Equally, the painful side of things is I realized that based on my age, I would have probably been written in COBOL back in the 70s, 80s, and I probably would have been sat on some AS400 mainframe system back in the time. So I do feel like I am actually legacy myself, which does feel really quite worrying and disturbing. So partly what I kind of said with the blog, and this is a snippet of the blog, it's kind of evolved since publishing on Friday, but you know, down in the right-hand corner, we've got all this beautiful stuff which we'd love to be in an end state, which is this whole predictive, prescriptive, deep learning, machine learning, which you know you can't really think about at the moment because you can't really understand where your data is. And then in the center, I don't know if anyone's seen the surfing framework before. A guy called Dave Snowden has written a number of books on it. But this is about where you act. So whether or not you're in the kind of what I kind of call the lean startup, which is your chaotic, complex environments where you don't really know what the landscape is. You don't know what you're trying to achieve, so you kind of want to fail early. You know, you're trying to do it, prove hypothesis and with some kind of clever experiments, compared to where, it sounds quite rude, but where we see ourselves in this kind of complicated and obvious area where we know the system we live in. We could be in investment bankers and we know how derivatives work, so it's obvious how that component works, but we sit in a complicated landscape where we don't really understand what's going on in our landscape. There is no maps of any good, architectural stuff. The sense, analyze, respond stuff is still a really quite difficult area. And partly the guy who I've quoted on here, a guy called referential, kind of said that actually innovation's not just for these lean startup companies. Innovation should be for the mainframe distributed systems landscape, where they're going to have the most data to get the most advantage out of this stuff. So to me, that shift in change is actually thinking, this is really our opportunity now, especially if you've got these kind of programs going on where you're going to be investing in things like test data management. This is the time to start digging up that stuff and understand what these diagrams look like within your organization. I guess everyone knows what that diagram is, just as anybody in the audience for what that diagram represents? You could probably read it if you have really good eyesight, which would be the next test. Anyone read that bottom corner? No, probably not. So that's the internet, which is my favorite diagram of the week. So that's the internet back in 1969. Which was the first, was 2 nodes, and then it became other stuff. So that's quite interesting. You've got to think about what that looks like now is humongous. But this is kind of just a bit of a side kick-off, just to give you a bit of an idea of where our minds are going with this. So, like I said, part of it, what I love about CA is 60% of our customer base are sat in this landscape which we're talking about today. So they're sat in the mainframe distributed systems landscape. And to me, this new challenges that we've got, we talk about things like microservices architecture, and we think about where we're trying to go with DevOps and beyond. This is really understanding what this landscape is, and more importantly, these even bigger systems, these ERP systems like SAP and Oracle, e-business, where things just got a heck of a lot more complicated. And these are layers, and I'm going to go through a bit about peeling back those onions. It's about my only Shrek reference I could ever put into a presentation deck. But part of it is, sometimes you see these endpoints, you can only see the endpoints for what have been exposed. So what actually happens at the end of these systems, which is typically going to end up here, the technology is not there to actually allow you to dig deeper into there and understand where the test data is coming from, how it flows, how you mask, and thankfully Tom's going to go through some more of that technical stuff in the second half of this. But what we've got to realise, I think, is that this is an evolution. Over many years, you've ended up into this new landscape where, we talk about the app economy. I don't really think the app economy is as relevant as it used to be. I look more at this kind of digital economy. And part of what I put in the top left-hand corner, this cognitive adaptive adoption, is starting to look at more and more complex complex systems. So the systems thinking principles or solutions thinking principles of how you deal with new endpoints. So when I did the same deck in California at the start of the month, it was before the Sony VR launch, and I actually kind of talked about the mass adoption of VR and how that's going to change things. As far as these are new interfaces, I also did a bit of a live demo on stage talking to Alexa, which I know has been around in the US for a few years now, about how you can get Alexa to actually do something right at the back end. Part of it is, it sounds like new technology, but these are just new opportunities and routes to market. At the end of the day, what happens is going to happen in mainframe land. As pretty as we make it, it's going to, it's just another endpoint. Equally, what we're seeing in the industry is this whole new approach of understanding, how does your business become more algorithmic based? How do you start exposing those smarts to your customers? We know that it's going to be loads of stack that's downstream, but part of the challenges now is to understand what the value of what you do is. So if you're about to embark on this kind of test data management kind of maturity level, you've got to understand what the value you're going to actually get out of doing this. So to me, these are new challenges in the industry, but this is the technology that we all deal with today. So I'm going to skip this slide because it's a bit of a nothingness slide, but in actual fact, I don't think going faster really does anything. It doesn't give any advantages to anybody. Increasing chaos is just faster chaos. And equally, if you can't understand the direct value chain of what you're doing, then releasing things quicker doesn't mean that it's going to be better. So, we talk about DevOps, we talk about Agile. To me, technology, approaches like lean engineering have much more value than trying to just do things faster, quicker, cheaper. And I think this is the challenge really now, is to work out why we're doing this. And partly I've just mentioned about value. I don't know if anyone's heard, I guess everyone's heard minimum viable product or minimal viable experience. These are both kind of techniques. What happens as far as minimum viable product is kind of that shift left approach to understanding what is the minimum product we need to develop, and then minimum viable experience is really taking things like your APM and your kind of what's happening in the real world and shifting that back to say this is based on our customer-centric kind of approach to things. We know customers are using these type of features. We need to make sure we're hardening these kind of flows because this is our critical part of our business. So I kind of, thrown in the kind of the mix about the whole minimum viable quality. How do you know that you've done just enough to making sure it's going to go through to the next stage? Equally, I kind of challenge viable and really adding the extra 2 V's around value and validate it. So that's kind of saying I can prove within an inch of its life that this is the reason why I believe this is true, not just say this is the minimum I need to do, which is more of a kind of an agile approach to things. And I just think, part of all this pain, which has kind of been brought on by doing things faster, better, cheaper, maybe isn't the right, driver. I come from kind of an engineering background, and when I started back in the 90s, I loved the whole engineering practices and principles, and there was a much better slant towards quality. And I think, I was really lucky to chat to some of the guys across APAC who were saying, well, actually, we do this in a similar kind of way. We talk about minimum viable delivery. And I know the Rabobank guys do that, there's a guy at the back who kind of nailed this stuff down. And they'll understand, based on story points or value, they can tell you how much value is going to go into each release. And literally, they will prioritize using things like Lynchburg estimation methods and stuff. They'll understand exactly what the value is going to happen from doing that release, and what the value of what's happening in production and how important that is to prioritize what's actually going on and happening. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to be getting smarter about what we do. We've got a finite amount of resources, a budget. Now it's time to think about doing this stuff smarter. So, we can throw down the normal kind of research insight kind of stuff, and I believe a lot of this is true and probably very relevant to customers as well, in the sense of we do understand that the landscape and is very difficult, it's hard, there's a lack of automation, it's reliant on manual effort. And I mentioned about Georgina at the back about the fact that she might pick up a slot on Thursday, but it was the slot on Thursday, which is Judy Gardner. She's stuck in the UK because she had a production issue for a tier 1 major bank, especially of everything, the uncertainty in the investment banking world at the moment. And she had to bring 264 people in over the weekend, which is her entire test team, because they've got a major production issue. The board have got involved. There's a serious financial impact, which they're doing, penalties and regulators that are coming in. This is the worst kind of nightmare that she could possibly be, especially as she's the head of quality and testing. These things should have never happened. But these happen too often. And that whole 264 people she had to bring over the weekend is because everything's manual hand-cranked. And she kept on saying to me, I'm not going to mention who this SI is, but the people who delivered the software into the bank hadn't tested it, they were rushing it, and every time they brought a new increment out, which they could get a new one out in 15, 20 minutes, straight away something else broke. And I just kind of think, this should never happen. You should know, you should be able to predict what the quality of that build is before you hand it over to the bank, and they then spend a huge amount of time to go through all the scenarios, even if they're doing risk-based approaches, waiting and having those kind of delays to me just seem like insanity, but it's still happening. And it's still having a massive financial cost for these kind of organisations that we're talking about. And that's what I mean about things like test data, and this is why we're here today to talk a little bit more about how you manage that, because if, for instance, that example, you've just built that environment, you deployed the application, you've just gone through and you've synthetically generated all the data you need. You start your manual testers, they start consuming data, someone finds a critical issue, that's the end of that build, you just wasted all that time. Wasted all that time generating the test data. You're not quite sure what test data's been consumed, so you've got to regenerate it all on the next build. It just seems craziness. The same as environments. You know, this whole challenge around what the dependencies are, waiting on services to come online. You know, I'm sure you'll probably catch the whole service virtualization, but to me, you know, lifecycle virtualization is absolutely essential. You know, you need to be able to take advantage of things like service virtualization, network function virtualization, to be able to enable you to actually be able to start earlier on. And we will go through this in a little bit more detail, but let's move on to the bread and butter. So, again, I'm not going to talk too much about the whole Agile adoption, because I'm not a huge, massive fan of it, because I've seen it work well in certain locations, not work well in other locations. I think we're getting into this kind of environment where we're starting to see more adoption with more success around kind of scaled Agile, scaled Agile frameworks like DAD, LESS, you know, part of those ones are managing this expectation between quality and release time, and also your end customer experience. And I just think, you know, we understand these challenges there, and we understand that there's potentially a multimodal delivery mechanism going on, where you're looking at this lean startup, very disruptive, very fast, very rapid idea to actual hypothesis. I'll be talking about this in design ops later in the week, to this kind of very slow release cycles, core IT kind of land, and then sat in the middle is this kind of Agile. And being able to move between those three modes is absolutely essential. I don't think anything should just happen in one mode. There's nothing wrong with, you know, starting off with a requirements engineering discipline, which is more kind of B model, to then go into Agile, then to move back into a different mode, go into the lean UX kind of mode if need be, but be able to go between these different modes. And to me, that's kind of really where the value is, where the value lies. So today's session, we're really going to be focusing on continuous testing. There's plenty of other sessions that are out there, which are going to be going through the whole continuous delivery pipe and release automation, and then all the way down to, you know, your staging, your building, and your releasing. So, you know, what I said I was going to talk about was the kind of continuous testing, and I just mentioned this whole concept around design ops, which is how you design your tests. And to me, a lot of this is bringing it back earlier, but adding more value. So, you know, the example I'm going to be giving on Wednesday is how you can take something which is just a wireframe and then build all your test cases out of it and generate all the test data before the application's even written. Simple concept. You know, I talked about this at Gartner a few years ago about the fact that you can prove an entire platform without writing a single line of code. And that was from a performance engineering perspective, that was from security, you know, because at the end of the day, most of that, like we said, you already know what your industry is, you know where your business, the business abstraction layer and how the flows work within your organization. The rest of it is just, you know, endpoints. So that whole think, make, check cycle, which is very quick and very rapid, you know, applies into all of those kind of those landscapes. So back to kind of this crazy stuff, and you won't. Thankfully, you've only probably got another 15 minutes from me, and you can get into some of the real grunt stuff. But you know, this whole concept of shifting left to earlier in the life cycle is important, but also shifting right is as well. You know, part of pulling the information about what is actually happening in your environment and in the real world, and really happening with your customers, to be able to pull those learnings left very rapidly is really important. So that's why the ones that I highlighted, I'm going to talk about the digital ecology, which is kind of probing and learning your landscape, and also that's kind of that landscape as you go down this release pipe. Equally, I'm going to talk about that digital archaeology, about how you go and dig up the test data at the different locations so that you can go through all these flows. And those core components at the top, which I'm talking about, which is kind of continuous testing, continuous insight, continuous delivery. You know, part of the challenge is understanding what you do with that information, how you provide some kind of minimum viable quality, kind of metric around that, so you can know when it's just good enough to go through there. So, let's go with the down. So this is the digging into kind of to understand what your landscape is. This is a really difficult challenge, and Hugh's just joined, Hugh Price, who's kind of was the founder of the product set that we're talking about now, and he's actually done a really interesting talk about this on a website called testtalks.com. So if you go to Test Talks and you type Hugh Price, you'll get a whole 60-minute conversation around how important this data archaeology is. And to me, I said earlier on about the fact that my only good strength reference is this kind of onion diagram. And what I'm showing you by this is that how things have changed. So I'm going to show you what I think the landscape looks like today, and then I'm going to move on to what landscape we now live in this new continuous delivery kind of landscape where there's environments and there's platforms and there's infrastructure and there's a lot more layers. But to me, this is very simple in the sense of I understand there's an application landscape, but I also understand, based on my previous experience, is that typically an application will have 26 upstream and downstream systems. Now these could be APIs, they could be data layers, they could be all sorts of other dependencies with other systems. So when you target this stuff, you shouldn't really just target an application landscape. You should target a solution landscape and understand how you can work with those teams to leverage the value of what you're bringing in something like test data management, where they can use the acceleration from having endpoints that may be virtualized, data generation that they can consume, or upstream data that you've generated, which is then real, that they can load into that system. So you've got to think about this simple layer at the moment, and then we'll go on to what the new models are looking like in kind of where it's really changed. Equally, one of the things which I was thinking about yesterday actually is this: as things evolve, and at the start I talked about evolution over revolution. What your application looked like 5 years ago or 50 years ago is very different to what it looks like now. So every time you add some more functionalities and features, that complexity infinitely increases. But what I used to find really challenging, especially when I used to work with companies like Tesco's in the UK, was they used to build a platform or a solution, and then they used to maintain to other customers earlier versions of this who didn't want to take version 2. So I use the example for this one. Monoprix based in Canada would be running on version 1, whilst we'd be firing ahead with version 3. So all our test data generation, we still need to be able to support what this landscape looked like, as well as this landscape. So as we evolved our models, we still had the integrity of being able to do the same minimum viable testing for version 1 as we did with 3. So everything, we had to think about how complex the testing these landscapes are. And we got versioning control, very smart versioning control built into TDN that allows you to take, generate data for basic customer as well as VIP customer. So part of it is keeping that integrity. This isn't just a stack of Excel spreadsheets and data generation. This is dealing with very complex models. So as a bit of an example of one of those kind of models, I guess everyone in the room here has probably got one of those on the left-hand side of some description. And it never, every day I always find there's a new one that's or a slight change or a slight different adoption from customers. I was speaking to an investment bank last week around the Swift modeling, and Hugh kind of pulled out an example for another big bank where we've modeled every type of possible Swift file. Now, like I said, to me, there's nothing new there. We know how this stuff works. Once you build the model, you can apply it anywhere. And I think this is what's really challenging within most organizations. They probably don't understand the models of their business processes. And this is where we've got a product called ARD, which is called Agile Requirements Designer, which will allow you to model out what your application looks like at a moment in time, which can understand the dependencies of where all this data and all these systems and all these flows overlay to actual business process, which is really important because at the end of the day, that's your smarts. And I kind of try to get people away from investing in a particular tool and buying into that tool, and then having to depend on that and depend on the actual the generation and consumption of that particular tool. So we did actually see there was a tool which, Hugh, what was the tool called, which did the Swift stuff?
It was an effect modeling originally. We did it with Dependencies, it was an effect modeling to start with, and then we moved it all into Agile design and basically to create the Swift most appropriate. The test we care about.
Sure. But there's a third-party platform which does this, but it's very heavy and clunky. And the whole thing, when it was built in whatever technology it was built in, it required someone to hand crank it. So someone to go in there and take a file and break it up, and then launch a task which will then generate an outcome. We just kind of looked at it last week and said, why are you building it into that, to that system where someone's manually got to go through that process and hand churn a test data file out? Why don't we just use what Hugh's just mentioned and bypass that? Because if your end state is looking at continuous delivery, you can't have a manual step where someone fires up some product or some old framework or VBT, a script they've written that will then go on generate that. You need to be able to go through, and that needs to be fully autonomized. So part of these challenges is you've got your favorite tools for each one of these, which can do test data management to a certain level of maturity. But being able to have that entire landscape where these big banks which have got like thousands of applications, you can't have a tool for each one. You need to find something that will give you that agility and also be able to deal with such complex landscapes. And to me that's really an heritage in our blood. Is that we've been built with 60% of our customers in mainframe land. That actually now we built that up, and we now can abstract it to a layer where you don't depend on these types of tools. So I think I mentioned the whole digital ecology stuff. I mentioned about understanding that landscape. So if you don't understand it, you're in the dark. Part of where I've seen real value coming from this stuff is understanding. You don't want to automate 100% of everything. That's not very risk-based. It's not very value-driven. Part of it is you try to automate everything, and we saw this again at this bank that we saw last week, where they've literally done some Selenium scripts to do one thing, and these very linear, tests where they're Excel spreadsheets combined with little utilities that kick off certain activities. And to be honest, trying to get to 100% isn't really the actual goal. Is to understand, where everything is, where the data is, visualize that. And a lot of the products that we do, so we've got a data visualization tool which allows you to visualize where missing data is in your test scenarios. Part of it is once people can see things, they can understand what complexity is, and they can start linking things together. If you're investing in people to have all this knowledge, you're going to find that sooner or later those people leave, and no one will understand the model. And this is kind of where we keep on going back to, is if you can go off and you can discover these different endpoints, you can then realize, what business flows are going over the top of them, what the dependency maps are, where the test data needs to be generated at each one of those endpoints. And then it makes things so much clearer to everybody involved. I mentioned service lifecycle virtualization about, the dependency of these most systems is hugely complex. And you need to start taking advantage of this kind of technology, because this is the only way to be able to deal with those 26 upstream, downstream systems that you depend on, without actually waiting for those to be delivered in. But equally, helping the other teams and keeping that communication going. And to me, I do everything in a kind of a risk-based approach. I need to understand where the maximum value is of what we're doing, because otherwise you're not going to see any real savings. Equally, you're not going to get the confidence that what you're delivering has value to the organisation, and you're not going to invest again into thousands of linear scripts that are hand-cranked, and in 5 to 10 years are going to just be irrelevant. We know that the tools and technologies today are going to evolve and have new capabilities, and the tools and technologies in 10 years' time are going to be completely different. So you need to start thinking about the future, and you need to think about how you're going to evolve those, and you're going to maintain those, and you're going to be able to deal with how your applications are continuously changing. And you're not just spending time investing in this stack now, and not really understanding the dependencies of what we've just talked about, the different versions, the different features of those versions, the different environments they need, a new load balancing technology in a kind of NFV kind of world. Equally, those microservices estates which are starting to pop up. You know, you've got to be able to manage this, and you've got to be able to manage all of these layers. I think this is where suddenly things are getting a lot more complex, and you need tools that can visualize that, can link the data, understand the dependencies, help you rapidly deploy between these locations. Think about pipeline as code, platform as code, security as code, configuration as code. Understand that you don't need dependencies on tools that are going to manually generate certain types of data in certain types of location, and you must be able to integrate into this end model. So here's a kind of an example. I think this is the last slide, and I'll hand over to Tom. But you know, to me, this is a kind of what the landscape we see in customers more and more. You know, you're taking production data. I talked a little bit about whole GDPR at the start, but you need to be able to take snapshots. You need to be able to use, synthesize data where necessary, so that you can stick it into a virtual environment. And that virtual environment is a choice of where you're going to deploy it to. That could be test, that could be performance. It equally is important. Now, these tools aren't specific to one particular type of siloed team. This is the deployment. This could actually be into production. You know, it doesn't really matter. But you need to be able to understand how you manage that level of maturity around your test data warehouse, where all these virtual data sets are, these synthetic data is generated. You need to deal with this as kind of an external, as a service competency which you have. And equally, you need to be thinking about all these kind of technologies, which Tom's going to kind of go through in a very high level with the remaining time. Or I hope so, anyway. So, now let's talk about this in the real world. And I'll hand you over to my lovely assistant.
Right, okay. So what I'm going to talk about is what digital really looks like in the world today, what some of the problems people are facing are across distributed and mainframe systems, and then the solutions that we've got in place to actually help overcome these challenges. So anyone that was here last year probably had this drilled into them time and time again, but I'm probably going to do it again today, just to give you a recap. And that is that companies are continuously starting to do more and more business through digital platforms. So websites, mobile phones, iPads, watches, all that great stuff. And us lot, as the consumers, prefer that method. And the demand for new functionality grows and grows and grows and grows. And an example of that is internet banking. So a show of hands of people in the room that do mobile phone banking. So a huge number of people. I'm one of those people as well. So an example is, about a month ago I was speaking with my mortgage advisor, trying to get a new mortgage, wanted to tell them what my ingoings and outgoings were, logged onto my mobile phone. First thing that came up was, sorry, service temporarily unavailable. It's not the first time that's happened to me, super annoying. If I were less lazy, I probably would have gone onto a price comparison website and find out who's giving me a cash incentive to switch. So, why is that important? I mean, these apps are huge. You know, they are imperative to the business succeeding. So we need to test them and make sure that they work. And the problem with that is these apps have a lot of baggage behind them. These nice, pretty front-end phone applications have got all of these complex systems behind them. And I chatted to Jonathan about this, and I said they're kind of like that nice girl or guy that you meet. You know, you first meet them, you think they're really attractive, you really like them, then you get to know them, and they've got this huge extended family behind them, and it's all very complex. So that's the way I see applications at the moment. So you can talk about that as you've got the legacy systems. That could be the grandma of the family. You know, they know everything, they keep everything running, and unfortunately they're probably not going anywhere anytime soon. But then you've got your distributed systems that are there, and then you've got the big data platforms as well. And the way I describe the big data platforms is like that cousin who's kind of cool, but no one really gets them. So the problem with this complexity is that when it comes to testing, testers and developers don't really know what the systems look like, they don't know what it is that they want, sometimes they don't really know what it is that they need. So luckily, we do have a solution for this. and that comes in the form of